Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about Microsoft because Microsoft is allegedly bribing a ton of people, except for me, apparently. I mean, come on, Microsoft. You know I love you, baby. Give me some money for a price. I'll love you more. Now, that said, joking aside, this is obviously a very serious issue and also a rather interesting one. Now, this is coming from The Verge. And here's what's going on. Yasser Elabd, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, was a director for emerging markets for the Middle East and Africa for Microsoft. And in 2016, Mr. Elabd, I believe, again, pronouncing that correctly, noticed a $40,000 payment to a client in Africa that didn't, according to The Verge, smell right. Now, the payment came from Microsoft's business investment fund, money meant for closing deals and opening up new lines of business, but the customer named in the request wasn't a customer at all, at least not according to the internal client list. He was a former Microsoft employee who had been terminated for poor performance, and he'd left the company so recently that Microsoft's own rules would have barred him from receiving an approval for this kind of payment. In the 2 years that followed that incident, Mr. Alab said that he did everything in his power to start stamping out these quiet bribes, a fight that made him a pariah among his colleagues and eventually cost him his job. But looking back, he believes Microsoft itself wasn't interested in stopping these kinds of payouts, preferring to let the phony contracts slip through and accept the associated cash. Now, Mr. Alab went public with his experiences on an essay published this past Friday on the whistleblower platform Lioness, alleging widespread bribery throughout Microsoft's foreign contract business. Mr. Alab estimates that more than $200 million each year is spent on bribes and kickbacks linked to Microsoft, often in countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. Now, for the regions that he personally worked in, he believes that more than half of the salespeople and managers were essentially on the take. Now, if that's true, that is a crazy and stunning look onto the ongoing corruption associated with international tech contracting and Microsoft's ongoing struggles to contain it. And here we are. Mr. Alab said, basically, he saw many different versions of the same problem. Sometimes, as in the African case I mentioned earlier, they were suspicious requests from the business investment fund. In another instance, he saw a contractor for the Saudi Interior Ministry receive a $13 million discount on its software, but that discount never actually made it back to the end customer. In another case, Qatar's Ministry of Education was paying $9.5 million a year for Office and Windows licensing that were never actually installed. Now, one way or the other, the money would end up leaking out of this contracting process, most likely split between the government, the subcontractor, and any Microsoft employees that essentially were in on the conspiracy. Now, all, again, previous joking aside, here's the crux of this rather serious problem. This kind of corporate bribery is a widespread problem internationally, particularly in countries where the government is the primary customer and mid-level bureaucrats see bribes as part of doing business. And that is true of a ton of countries out there, to the point where the World Economic Forum estimates that more than $1 trillion is lost to bribes of this manner globally every single year. Now, it's harder to estimate the portion involving the scam described by Mr. Alab, where the international companies pay off local decision makers to secure their business or drum up sham deals just to loot the treasury, which obviously is a huge problem. The cost of this, though, is typically borne by the country's taxpayers, meaning you're paying in the taxes and your bureaucrats are making the money, oftentimes not giving you those services. Oftentimes, this is also in nations with little money to spare and diverted to the bureaucrats and subcontractors instead of the people it's basically designed to help. Now, no small part of the money is sent to parent companies as part of this ruse, giving them, unfortunately, a blind eye to a lot of this situation. Now, Microsoft has struggled with foreign bribery in the past, again, according to this article in The Verge, which I think was great. Microsoft basically had this issue. A senior executive in Hungary was found to have inflated margins as part of a bribery scheme between 2013 and 2015, according to a Justice Department investigation. A separate SEC case alleged that more than $440,000 in marketing funds were diverted to gifts for employees of the Saudi government. Microsoft settled both cases in 2019, paying a combined $25 million to investigating agencies. Now, it's a challenge, obviously, for any multinational multinational company, but Mr. Alab's experience at Microsoft is starting to make him think that the company has basically just given up fighting it. In other words, it's just the cost of doing business for a behemoth like Microsoft. Now, reach for comment. Microsoft emphasized commitment to its ethical practices, pointing to the standards of business, quote unquote, training that all of their employees are required to take, including specific coaching on how to report a bribery, basically like the ones that were described by Mr. Alab. And I quote Becky Lenaberg, she's a VP at Microsoft and Deputy General Counsel for Compliance and Ethics, and I quote, "We are committed to doing business in a responsible way and always encourage anyone to report anything they see that may violate the law, our policies, or our ethical standards. We believe we've previously investigated these allegations, which are many years old, and addressed them. We cooperated with government agencies to resolve any concerns." Now, obviously, this could be a case of one hand not knowing what the other is. Being a director of emerging markets doesn't necessarily make you the C-level of basically a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And so obviously there could be a lot of different balls in the hand. I'm not going to sit here pointing it out, joking aside, where's my bribe, Microsoft? Is a problem. And it's in a problem apart because I think what this really shows and underscores is that we have a lot of problems with government corruption around the globe. We see basically government officials taking bribes or abusing their office in this manner, essentially to make themselves rich. It's estimated that Vladimir Putin himself, not to pull Russia or Ukraine into this, but Vladimir Putin himself is worth something like $100+ billion and is considered one of the world's richest men. Obviously, that's a huge problem. And you see it at the local level as well. I'm sure there's a dog catcher out there getting some kind of bribe for something, but this really basically, I think, is something that we all need to address, because if we don't have these kinds of standards, the only ones that are typically being harmed are the taxpayers. And that is the point that The Verge made, which I think is just such a very, very important part. And so I think it's a good article. You should go read it. It's on The Verge. It's by Russell Brandom, and I think Russell did a fantastic job with this article. It's such an important issue. We're going to see where this basically shakes out, but I don't think Microsoft is alone at this, especially when you're playing in this massive of a pool. Any major tech corporation that is basically dealing with any governments around the globe, they're going to run into attempts at bribery. They're going to run into corruption. That is inevitable. That is the quote-unquote cost of doing business. And so maybe Mr. Alab is correct. Maybe Microsoft just threw up their arms and said, you know what? Why are we going to basically try to bail out the ocean with a bucket? And so that's a huge problem. We'll see where this goes. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.